coming to the end of the Noah series, the four-part series on the faith of Noah. It comes as part of the much longer series of lessons about the men and women of faith listed in Hebrews 11 as worked examples of what saving faith looks like in a human life. So, going back to our takeoff passage in Hebrews 11, I'm going to go back one verse. It gets a little bit of context here as we speak of Noah and bring Noah to a conclusion. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built a box to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Today we'll be talking about how he condemned the world. We've spent 3 long lessons talking about how he saved his family by building the box and getting in it and staying there for 14 months. But now we want to talk about how he condemned the world. It's not that he brought the flood upon the world. It's not like that Noah went, hoobly, boobly, boobly, I've got God power, I'm going to kill everybody with a flood. No, not at all. The condemnation of the world that it's talking about is that by contrast, by example, he showed that it was possible to live by faith, that these people were without excuse. They could have made the same choice Noah did. It says in another place that Noah preached for 120 years while the flood was on its way to come. That he preached to his generation, and we see that the only ones who responded were his 3 sons and their wives and Noah's wife. So 8 people were saved. 4 men and 4 women, which is proven by science in that there are 4 strains of mitochondrial DNA in the human race. So, the story then is one of an entire generation of people who were condemned by the flood, by God, and Noah, whose life showed that they could have made the righteous choice that he made. And so in their condemnation, they now have no excuse. So how many people died in the flood? A good scientific estimate, and people will say, oh, that's bad science, because they just by definition say, if you believe in the biblical story of the flood, by definition that's bad science. Therefore, any science you apply to it is bad science, and it is a totally circular argument. And circular arguments are not valid. But if we start by understanding that the flood story is true, and all of these things that say can't be true, things like the law right now, today, they are very assiduously grinding up lava to make a road to save some people in case of a lava outburst in Hawaii. And there's a very strict law now against taking rock samples and taking them home with you. And I always wonder if that's because they had too many cases where fresh lava that had just hardened was dated at being 1 million years old, and thereby undermining science. So now, if you do that, then you're breaking the law. I always wonder if that's the real reason for that law. But if we take science and apply it to the story of the flood and the rate at which the people were multiplying in this be fruitful and multiply era, and before the curse, before the curses that are on man through the flood. And seeing that people in that era lived much longer, how is that scientifically possible? There's such a thing as the chromosomal end caps, the DNA end caps. There's end caps on our DNA, and we are born with a certain number of end caps. I believe it is 17, and there's a certain number, and every generation of cells from the time that your first stem cells appear, that every generation of cells after that loses end caps until you get to the point where there are no end caps left, and then you cannot replenish your cells, and so we die at the age of 70 or 80 years. But if that was not the case, if they had not lost the enzyme that replaces the end caps on DNA on replication, then it is quite conceivable that we see these ages of people being 600, 800 years old. And the interesting thing, as a side note, is that we dig up skeletons and we see that they are seem to be not quite human because they have these huge brow ridges. But the brow ridge actually grows all through your life. And if you project that a person were to live 250 years, they would look just like those caveman skeletons when they're 250 years old. I would look like a caveman if I lived to 250 years, because these bone ridges are slowly growing all my life. All right. So how many people were living? Probably about the same as the population of the earth today. Somewhere between 1 and 10 billion with a B people. That's a lot of people. All right. Chapter 9. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, and saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each man, too, I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood be shed. By man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you, and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth, and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Okay. The rainbow. We're going to talk today about the rainbow covenant. So, the rainbow. Ha, 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 ha. Everybody knows the rainbow is caused by the sun going through the clouds and the small particles and all that, and there had to be rainbows before the flood because every time it rained, it did. So I am not going to propose that God changed the laws of optical physics at this time. But I will say that the description that we have of the earth before the flood and of the changes that happened at the flood are consistent with a world climatic system that was a universal mild climate. There are places on earth today that never experience severe storms, that never experience strong storms. They're diverted away and so on. You have places where it never rains and yet there is moisture. The coastal regions of the Namib in southern Africa are watered by a fog, but they never receive rain. Well, if they never receive rain, they never have that phenomenon of a heavy storm cloud with its concomitant phenomena of light being diffracted through falling raindrops in the sky, and so they would not be seeing a rainbow there. And the whole earth apparently was like that. But now we have the rainbow. So while we're talking about the rainbow, I'll talk about a modern use of the word rainbow, the rainbow bridge and the rainbow movement. The rainbow movement is a movement, a worldwide movement, and it's not some little secret organization. It's just a very loose confederation that has announced through many things that the way you can tell who's in the movement, what groups are in the movement, is wherever you see the word rainbow, that's us. All right? And what are they saying that they're attempting to do? They're attempting to cross back over the rainbow bridge. What does it mean to cross over the rainbow bridge? To go before this covenant, to abrogate this covenant, to say this relationship with God that was established by God with Noah, we want to put an end to it and be our own bosses in a way that existed before the flood. We want to go back to the pre-flood existence, where mankind was doing whatever it pleased without any explicit laws. Where everyone is vegan and there is no capital punishment. They want to go back before that. And this is not some little tiny group. It's not organized. But it is behind many, many of the groups that we do see that are loosely referred to as globalists. Now, that is not some weird conspiratorial theory of a woman whose initials are MF, and I'll let you look her up, wrote a book, and her credentials are such that it's clear that she really knew these people. And she was very close with the people who wrote the Humanist Manifesto. And she said, what we're doing with this Humanist Manifesto and many other things, you can look up who are the signatures of the Humanist Manifesto, is that what we are doing is this movement, which we call the Rainbow Movement, the open conspiracy. It's an open conspiracy. We're doing it right out in the open. And we are trying to cross the Rainbow Bridge, bring all of humanity across the Rainbow Bridge to the pre-Noahic situation. Now, am I being paranoid conspiracy theory? No. That's what they say they're doing. Now, are they really accomplishing it? I don't know. All I'm saying is that's what they say they're doing. That's what they say they're trying to do. I just take them at their word. Somebody says that they're up to something. This is what they're doing. And the first thing I do is say, no, you're not lying, and take you at your word. That's what you're doing. Okay. So what is this covenant they're trying to abrogate? And that's what we're going to learn about. So God blessed Noah, and that's part right there. They don't want to be under God's blessing. They want to be free of God. They see God as a as a stifling force that keeps them from having the relationship with the angels and spirits that they want to have. But God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. Now, back when I first started reading about fill the earth, there were only about 3 billion people, 3.5, 4 billion people on the earth. So somebody said, what if you took everyone and they stood around in a crowd, a tight crowd, not like some American crowds where everybody wants to stay this far away from each other, but like you'd find a crowd trying to get tickets in India, for example, okay? Or getting on a train in India, or on a commuter train in Tokyo. It's perfectly doable for people to be, on that tight on a train. Or what about at a 5 o'clock in a big office building, how close we stand in a crowd in an elevator at 5 o'clock in a big office building when it's time to go home, and the elevators are in high demand. If we all stood in a crowd like that, how much space would all these 4 billion people on Earth take up? Or would we fall off? Are we really falling off the planets? And the answer that was given then was, if you take the city of Jacksonville, Florida, and you stood everybody on the face of the earth up, like people would stand in an elevator, that distance from each other, they would not quite, the entire 4 billion people would not quite fill up the land area of Jacksonville, Florida. That's all. All the people on the earth could stand side by side in Jacksonville, Florida, if you assembled them all together. Have we filled the earth? Doesn't sound full to me. Now you'll see all these people. Well, what about Africa? I've seen those pictures when they were talking about overpopulation and those places in Africa where it's just miles and miles and miles of tin huts. Yes. We're talking about the Damora slum. I've been there. We're talking about the slums of Mombasa. I've been there. I've been in the middle of it. I've been places there where no white man has gone. Really? Is it hell on earth? Yes, it is hell on earth. But I've been all over that country that they are in, Kenya. And most of it is wide open and empty. You go for miles and you cannot see another human being. All you see is the occasional zebra. And it's fertile. Then you go other places and it's just garden after garden after garden of very nicely kept family gardens, not too crowded. Everybody's there able to grow their own food. The issue is unfair land distribution. You have one family that ran the country for many generations, and they have taken away the land from everyone else and forced them out of the land, and they have to live in these crowded cities, the only places that are left for them. But the country of Kenya is not full, even though they show you these pictures to try to show you that it is. They're lying with pictures. Yes, that's a true picture, but they're not giving you the whole context. It is like the pictures they used to do in the 60s to show there was a huge riot taking over Detroit or Washington, and it was really about 50 people. But when you do the telephoto camera just right, it looks like the whole city is full of people, when it's just a little crowd listening to somebody harangue them. So, we're told to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So what is the first thing that is the rejection of this covenant? Is when we say we will decide how many children to have instead of God will decide. So what? Have I adopted the Catholic doctrine against birth control? No, I have not. I've adopted the biblical doctrine. The biblical doctrine says that the Catholic doctrine is wrong. The Catholic doctrine says as long as you pretend to be natural by looking at the calendar, you can limit the number of births you have. What I see here is a command that says, be fruitful and multiply. There is no recension of that. And fill the earth. Well, the earth's going to get full. Yes, someday it will get full. That's God's problem. But He has ordered us to fill the earth. So we should be doing our best within the confines of proper marriage to fill the earth. And so when all these Christians say, well, what if this and what if that and what if the other? And they wonder why their lives have become miserable. What do you mean their lives have become miserable? I went to India in 1983, and what surprised me is among the very, very, very poor, because I was living among people that were so poor that when I came back to America and I showed my pictures to friends of mine who had grown up in India and then emigrated to the U.S., they said, I don't know whether I should tell you this, Ken, but I would not ever even go down that street. And I said, well, that's the street I live on when I'm in India. I would not even go down that street. That's how poor the places I lived were. And the people were all happy. They were all smiles. And I later found that about a large percentage of people in that neighborhood were Muslim. I knew a lot were Hindu. And I knew that quite a few were Christian in that particular coastal area. There were a lot of Catholics. There were a lot of many other denominations. And everyone, all these very poor people were very happy. They had happy families. So one thing and another, and then I came back one more time, and then I came back again to stay for a distant time. Basically a generation later, I was. It was a little over 20 years between the visits, and the people weren't happy anymore. You see, the government had put forth these bumper stickers saying, one child, happy family, one child, happy family, and promoting the idea that everyone would be happier if they had fewer children. So 20 years later, I came and I was at a event. It was on the border of Bangladesh and India, and it was in a mixed community that had Christians and Hindus and Muslims. So as I was saying, I was right on the area where Hindu India met up with Muslim Bangladesh, and there were people waiting outside the compound because a meal was being served, and after the invited guests would have the meal, then all the uninvited guests could have the meal. And outside the gate were Hindu families, Muslim families, and Christian families. And I turned to my host, who was a pastor, and I said to him, that group over there, that one, just past that fence post, that group. I said, that's the Muslims, isn't it? And he said, how did you know? He said, yes, but very few people from outside know the little subtle differences of clothing that indicate that someone is a Muslim or someone is a Hindu or someone is a Christian. How did you know? I said, it wasn't anything about their clothing. I looked at how their children were behaving and how they were behaving toward their children. You see, the Hindus were scolding their children, slapping down their children, not hard, I'm just aggravated with their children, and the children were fighting with one another, and there were not very many children. And the Christians, who were of other denominations than the ones of the host, they were the same way. They were scolding their children, the children were not getting along, and so on. But when you looked at the Muslims, yes, I'm praising Muslims at this point. I absolutely abhor the theology of their religion, but they do some things right, and we're told to honor where honor is due. So, I will honor where honor is due. And there they were, the 5 and 6-year-old children were carrying the 1-year-old children while the mother carried the newborn in her arms, and everyone was getting along happy. Why is that? Because the Hindus had listened to the government when they said, you'll be happier if you have only a few children, and they were not happy. They were not treasuring their children anymore. And the Hindus were, and the Christians had followed along with the government, and were only having 1 or 2 children, and they were not happy anymore. And the Muslims had said, well, I won't say what they said to the government, but told the government where they could get off the train, and went along with their continual practice of having as many babies as they can. And for all that they are wrong about just about everything theologically, they are following the command that God gave: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And guess what? They have happy families. And it's obvious. The difference is obvious. When we follow God, we get a blessing, even if our theology is totally wrong. Now, I'm not saying they're saved because of it, but I'm saying God keeps His promises to bless those who honor His commands. And they're honoring His command, a command that most Christians are dishonoring blatantly. Be fruitful and multiply and increase the number on the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all beasts of the earth and on all birds of the air, upon every creature that moves on the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, now I give you everything. So we are given meat to eat. Now that is a gift from God. When we say, oh, it's better not to eat meat, we are saying God gave us a bad gift. One of the things that can cause some of the worst friction in a family is when a child gets a Christmas gift from grandma and says, I don't like that one, take it back. Nothing will spoil a Christmas day like a child telling grandma or Uncle Joe that he doesn't like the present he was just given. That that's what we're doing to God. We're saying, oh, you gave us meat to eat, but we don't think that's a good present. You got it wrong, God. You weren't supposed to give us meat to eat. I'm glad I live in Louisiana. I'm glad I live in Pine Prairie, Louisiana. I'm glad we've got 3 great butcher shops. We've got 2 great butcher shops and 1 incredible butcher shop. One of the best meat in the world. All right. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. What does that mean? It does not mean don't eat raw meat. It doesn't mean that at all. It has nothing to do with it. It means drain the animal's blood out when you kill it. And don't save that blood and use it for food. There is such a thing as blood sausage. Down here they call it blood boudin, black boudin. Those who believe the Scripture don't eat it. And this was reiterated in Acts chapter 15, where the 4 things that we're to do were part of the commands to the Gentiles. They're not part of. It's not a matter of follow part of the law of Moses, but these were things that the Gentiles, even those who are not under the law of Moses, were expected. And one of those is that you do not eat blood. How many Christians take that seriously? We talk about all the things. Well, I'm just a good Christian. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And yet the things we're specifically told to do, we don't do. The things we're told not to do, we do. Is that walking in holy fear? Is that the outcome of a saving faith? And then he says, I will demand an accounting. And from each man I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he is made man. And then he repeats, as for you, be fruitful and multiply and increase in number. Again, the command is given. And by the way, the same command had been given to Adam. We are to fill the earth. We are to do our best to fill the earth. We take seriously, go into all the world and preach the gospel, but we don't take seriously, go into all the world and fill the earth by having lots of babies. We don't take that seriously. That's just as much a command as spread the gospel. Just as much a command. So, but also we have that for murder is capital punishment. That is a command of God. And so when we try to say, oh, but we don't like that, and it says his blood will be shed, even when we get back to hanging, that was introduced as a bloodless way of executing justice. Because it's not so ooey looking, with not having blood flying everywhere, not having the head roll off. But it's less barbaric. But God says that when there is capital murder, this is how it's to be dealt with. but, that doesn't sound very Christian. But, what about this? What about that? We have departed so far from it. I wonder, how can we ever get back? But what these people are trying to do, and trying to influence all society, and trying to influence the churches, and very well, largely succeeded, to move back before this covenant, to abrogate this everlasting covenant. And we do find a place where it talks about the horrors upon those who have broken the everlasting covenant. So let's strive to live by faith, to walk in holy fear, and to live our lives in accordance with the everlasting covenant that God has made with us.